Before being shut down by the previous Conservative government, the National Council of Welfare released a report criticizing how Canada's welfare system is a box with a tight lid. Those in need must essentially first become destitute before they can qualify for temporary assistance. But the record shows once you become destitute, you tend to stay in that state. You have no means to absorb setbacks in income or unexpected costs. You can't afford to move to where jobs might be or upgrade your skills. And to put this situation to numbers, 3.3 million people are living in poverty. 3 million people are still working and yet under the poverty line, and 2.5 million people are unemployed in Canada. In 2013, we spent $185 billion on social services that have existed for decades, and yet we haven't made any dents in our poverty rates. Many of these programs have grown in inefficiency, spending up to 31.5% of their entire budget just on administration. So clearly we're putting a lot into our social services. Why don't they seem to be serving their purpose and bringing anyone above the poverty line? It's been proven time and again that the welfare wall or welfare cliff, whatever you want to refer to it as, hasn't gotten any easier to overcome despite the many reforms that we've experienced within our current system. So what is the answer to this extensive issue of poverty that has been pervading in our societies for centuries now? A rather revolutionary idea that's been proposed as an answer to this question has been the concept of basic income. You may have heard of it as it's becoming a rather hot topic in politics, and what many people don't know is that there's actually two different approaches to the basic income concept, which is what I'm going to be discussing today. So stick around to learn more about that.
An idea
can escape.
Ideas are bulletproof.
Hello everyone, welcome back to ALifeLearned. My name is Becca, and as I mentioned, today I want to take the basic income conversation here in Ontario in the specific direction of addressing the different approaches that have been suggested, what's specifically being suggested for here in Ontario, and what exactly we need in order to have the most beneficial impact with such a large change in approach. For anyone not familiar with the concept, basic income is generally the idea of giving every person a modest income simply as a right of citizenship, as a way of addressing absolute poverty. That is, a person's inability to access even basic needs, not so much relative poverty, which is your level of income relative to those in your country around you. One of the main reasons this concept is being considered here in Canada is because of how we Canadians view human rights. It's actually in our Charter of Rights that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right to not be deprived thereof. And it's also considered a right to be able to pursue the gaining of a livelihood in any province. So to translate that, basically we as Canadians have a right to feel secure and free, as well as a right to gain a livelihood wherever we're living in Canada. So with this, many different organizations have actually been discussing that it's not right for people to be stuck in poverty and to have their rights basically infringed on because of the income situation that they're living in and has been imposed on them by society. And then thus comes basic income into the conversation as a possible way to address these problems. Now, before I get into discussing the different approaches of basic income, I first want to deal with the first few thoughts or ideas that tend to come up to those who first learn about basic income. And to start off, yes, people will still work. Consider retirees just as a perfect example. In reality, a basic income actually already exists for seniors in terms of old age security and a guaranteed basic income for anyone over the age of 65. And when this was first introduced, it reduced the poverty rates amongst seniors from 30% to 3%. So that's kind of a big impact. But even with introducing this, a lot of those people didn't stop working. It's been shown that at least 54% of retirees still want to continue working or volunteering or contributing in some way. And that's 3 million people just in retirees. If we're talking about younger age groups, they'll want to participate even more because in a lot of ways they'll be more able-bodied to do so. So in that sense, it's very clear that giving people a basic amount to live on doesn't stop their motivation to want to contribute and work. People always want more, and that will be attainable with a guaranteed income. You can only get your basic needs met with the basic income, but by working on top of that, you can get more. That's why people will want to work. And to address the biggest argument of all, yes, it's going to cost. There are many different numbers that are being thrown around. The biggest one I found was 40 billion, which is quite possibly a number we could be looking at. But these numbers aren't impossible to attain. They're actually very easily found within the system if we reorganize it and take out all the redundancies in administration and all the places that money doesn't need to be going. Between some of the basic income services such as old age supplement, child tax benefit, welfare payments, GST and other tax credits, as well as just employment insurance, that's already $100 billion in savings just by clumping all of those programs into the basic income. Then you also need to consider that you're increasing the buying power of 35 million people within the country, which is going to increase the amount of spending, which is going to increase the amount of HST that's coming out, which is going to increase the amount of income the government is bringing in, thus creating more funding. But these are just the first few points about basic income and how it can benefit. There are so many other reasons why it's needed and why it would be beneficial, and I highly suggest you check out a few links that I have up here, or check out as many links as you can that I put down in the description showing other videos that explain really well why basic income would be incredibly beneficial to basically all societies. But to get more into the actual applications of basic income, as I was mentioning, there are two dominating approaches to this concept. One is referred to as a negative income tax, and the other is called a universal basic income. And though these terms are actually used synonymously throughout a lot of different articles regarding basic income, they actually differ greatly in terms of their reach and predicted impact. And in regard to what's happening closer to home, here in Ontario, current discussion seems to be surrounding the general idea of anyone whose income falls below a certain level will receive a top-up through the tax system. And this sounds right along the lines of the basic income approach of negative income tax. So with a negative income tax, basically below a certain point, your taxes would be considered negative, and or the government would give you money instead of you paying them. So basically with this idea, the less you earn, the larger your tax return would be. But by the sounds of it, this is basically just a one-year payment that you would receive and then live off of for the rest of the year. This concept is currently thought to possibly be the lesser expensive of the two approaches, but at the same time it seems to also leave a lot more potential holes for people to fall through. And a good example of that could be, what if you lose your job halfway through the year? How do you then compensate for that situation if you can only report your income at tax time? Does that then mean that we have a monthly income tax that we have to start reporting? That seems a little silly because that really increases the administration costs and almost feels like we're putting everybody on welfare with how much everyone will have to report. But with the universal basic income, every single person receives the check regardless of their working situation, their age, or other circumstances. This would ultimately solve the administration issues of the negative income tax in that a monthly check that goes to everyone no matter what requires a lot less administration and can very much fill in for random situations such as losing your job halfway through the year. But the argument against this particular concept is that it does seem to appear that it's going to cost more. The idea is basically to have all of those with a larger income basically pay back that guaranteed income at the end of the year come tax time. But how exactly that's going to happen and how much it's going to cost throughout the year is one of the biggest discussions regarding universal basic income. So with the way the negative income tax targets lower income people, it could be said to be the better program for actually fighting poverty. But the higher marginal tax rate that it's proposed to have is less beneficial to the working poor because it will take a lot more of their benefits away as they work and prevent them from earning any more than the negative income tax and thus discourage them from working at all. On the other hand, the universal basic income is associated with a lower marginal tax rate, which would be a lot more encouraging for lower income people to work. But unfortunately, it is considered less efficient at raising the incomes of those in poverty because it does go to everyone. But in that way, it's much more sensitive to inequalities and social inclusion, as well as much more supportive of labor participation and citizenship in general. So though I previously mentioned that some think the negative income tax may cost less, overall they are actually both predicted to have about the same impact on the tax burden and the public budget. But as you should have seen with the previous comparison I just made, they will have very different impacts in terms of distribution and the way they impact the workforce. And one thing that a lot of people bring up when discussing both of these concepts is that a simple cash influx isn't going to solve all the issues of poverty, because there's a lot of issues of discrimination and stigmatization as well. And when it comes to the negative income tax, it's unfortunately argued that this stigmatization might not be properly addressed because not everyone is receiving it, whereas with the universal basic income, everyone gets it, and thus there is literally no stigma around it. So in the end, regardless of which program you see to be a better fit, keep in mind that the idea of basic income isn't meant to be a holy grail to fix all poverty issues, but it is very much a step in the right direction because it's a different kind of thinking to fix problems we've had for decades. And it's obviously clear that there's a lot of practical considerations and details that will need to be worked out in order to create a program like this. But one thing that needs to be considered when having this discussion is this isn't about applying the rigid rules of a negative income tax or a universal basic income, but rather trying to see what traits out of both of those programs would benefit society most and how we can combine them to try and combat poverty while keeping the labor market going. Further, the legacy of issues that have been created by poverty, just in the mental health sector to begin with, let alone the physical health sector, aren't going to disappear overnight. Once this program is implemented, there's going to be a lot of time of having to work out the many issues that poverty creates in people's lives, and hence a lot of programs needing to be maintained in order to address these comorbid issues. But through time, we can work them out and we can have them be less prevalent within our society if less people are growing up living in poverty. And whatever program they do first come up with is of course expected to have flaws and inadequacies within it, as any program is when it's first implemented, but you have to start somewhere, and by starting somewhere we can then improve on whatever program they start with. And it should be noted that basic income actually isn't a new idea, but it is an approach that hasn't been tried yet. In reality, this idea has existed for quite a long time and was actually tried and experimented with back in the 60s and 70s. There were 5 different experiments that were done, 4 in the States and 1 in Canada. The one in Manitoba is one that people most know about. The issue with that is that interest in basic income died back then as a result of political interest dying out. And I do believe that was a result of public interest fading. We forgot about it, basically. We stopped pushing our politicians and they let it go. The government changed, they lost interest, and they dropped the program. They actually never even got results from that program until recently when someone dug up the boxes and then analyzed all the data. Nothing was done with it back in the 60s and 70s, and we need to make sure that doesn't happen again. So it really is awesome to see interest in this concept revived and possibly applied instead of just being let go. But it's going to take time. Ontario is only currently talking about doing another pilot project like what was done back in the 70s. And thus, we need to stay on top of our politicians. We need to stay on top of this topic and make sure that they know that we are still interested and we do want this change. Not just today, not just next year, but 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we are still interested. We still want this change. We still need this change. And so in the end, it's going to be our continuous support and pushing of our politicians that's going to be integral to ensuring these programs actually progress into something beneficial for society. So if this is an idea that you're in support of, if you can see how incredibly beneficial this would be to our society, I highly encourage you to contact your local representative, whether it be federal, provincial, or municipal. Contact them all. Google them, find their name, find their email, find their phone number, find some way to contact them and let them know that you are in support of this program, that you believe it will work, and that you want to see them move forward with it. And with that, it's actually a really good idea to educate yourself thoroughly on the subject before going ahead and contacting any representatives. So I highly encourage you to check out all the links I've put in the comments, the different articles, the different videos. They're all very informative on universal basic income. And even check out some of the networks that I've listed. That's a way that you can participate in various different groups of people that are trying to be more productive about this issue. And please do see that the more important question questions here aren't how much will it cost, but will we get value from our money? Not so much what will the lazy people do with the money, but what would you do with the money? How would you be innovative and creative? How would you improve on your life or the lives of others? There is so much that can be done with a progressive idea like this, and it's only through productive and intellectual conversations between people like us that we can actually get these things moving forward. So please do go educate yourself as much as you can about this topic, and then come back and let me know what you think about the negative income tax and the universal basic income. Do you think one is better than the other, or can you think of a third program that would be a mesh of all the beneficial features in both programs? There's so much that can be discussed about this topic, and again, it's only through our productive and constructive conversations that we can really get things moving forward for society. So please do feel free to comment below, participate in the conversation, share this video with anyone who doesn't know about basic income, and get the conversation rolling further, because it's only in us participating and making change that change really happens. And as always, please join me again next week where I try again to share a little something I've learned in life.